Have you ever wondered why we experience something as truly unique and subjective as conscious awareness? Tonight, we'll uncover a fascinating possibility that's been overlooked by mainstream neuroscience for decades, that consciousness might be connected to quantum frequencies operating within our brains. As you sit here listening, pay attention to the tiny structures inside your neurons. They're vibrating at frequencies so specific and precise that they might be performing quantum computations that shouldn't exist in a warm, wet environment like your skull. Yet they do. Some studies published in peer-reviewed journals suggest this possibility. For decades, mainstream neuroscience has assumed that the brain works like a classical computer. Billions of neurons firing in patterns create consciousness through pure information processing. But what if there's something else happening beneath that classical layer? What if consciousness has a quantum signature? Imagine standing in an empty concert hall where you hear a beautiful symphony. The music you perceive, the integrated experience of melody and harmony and rhythm emerges from hundreds of individual instruments playing simultaneously, each vibrating at specific frequencies. Yeah, it's not just the vibrations themselves that create the music, it's how they're orchestrated, coordinated, aligned across entire networks of neurons through physical connections. This is analogous to a fundamental puzzle in consciousness research. Your consciousness might work similarly to an orchestra. Below the threshold of your awareness, millions of quantum oscillations are happening in structures called microtubules, distributed throughout your brain in every neuron. These quantum frequencies are orchestrated, coordinated, aligned across entire networks of neurons through physical connections and potentially through quantum entanglement. And their interference patterns, their resonance, and sees their harmonic relationships might be what actually generates the unified field of awareness you experience as consciousness. The moment-to-moment coherence of your subjective experience, the seamless integration of sight and sound and bodily sensation and complex thought might emerge from quantum coherence, binding information together across distributed neural tissue in ways that classical neural networks operating independently alone cannot explain. Each neuron firing is like an individual instrument, but the conscious moment is like hearing the symphony. This isn't happening by accident. If this interpretation is correct, then your brain appears to be exquisitely fine-tuned to capture and amplify these quantum frequencies, to protect them, to use them. The architecture of your neurons, the precise arrangement of proteins within your microtubules, the geometric lattice of tubulin DR, the way these structures connect to one another across your entire cortex through gap junctions and possibly through quantum entanglement. All of this seems optimized for maintaining coherence at quantum scales in an environment where such coherence shouldn't theoretically survive. Most quantum systems we've studied in laboratories require near absolute zero temperatures to maintain their quantum properties without rapid decoherence. They live for mere fractions of a second, often femtocons or picoseconds, before environmental interference, before thermal noise and background radiation destroys their coherence and collapses them into classical states. The brain does this at body temperature around 37 C, warm as your hand in sunlight. It does this in a warm, wet, electrically noisy environment filled with constant molecular motion and electromagnetic activity. It does this continuously every moment of your waking life and arguably during sleep as well, every second you're alive. That this is possible at all was considered impossible just 30 years ago, an impossibility grounded in what we understood about decoherence and environmental interaction. Scientists thought the brain was simply too chaotic, too hot, too soaked in water, and filled with too much noise to maintain any genuine quantum effects for meaningful durations. Some researchers now argue that nature may have found ways to support such effects despite these conditions. When neuroscientists talk about the classical brain, they're describing the well-known story of neural transmission, a story that's been refined and elaborated over more than a century of research. Information flows from neuron to neuron through synaptic connections. A neuron fires, generating an electrical impulse that travels along its axon. Neurotransmitters are released from vesicles at the axon terminal, cross the microscopic synaptic gap, bind to receptors on the receiving neuron, and trigger an electrical cascade. This cascade propagates along the receiving cell's membrane, generating changes in electrical potential. If the input is strong enough, the cell reaches threshold and fires itself, generating an action potential that travels down its own axon. The signal travels onward neuron to neuron in this sequential fashion. From this perspective, consciousness is the emergent property of massively parallel classical computation happening across your neural networks. But what's left unexplained by classical neuroscience alone? No amount of mapping neural firing patterns or describing computational flows explains the existence of subjective experience. There's an explanatory gap that remains, a mystery that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. Why does any of it feel like anything from the inside? Why do you have subjective experience at all? This is where some researchers introduce quantum consciousness as a potential framework rather than a proven mechanism. When you measure brain waves using EEG technology, what you're actually detecting is the cumulative electrical activity of millions of neurons firing in rough synchrony. An electrode placed on your scalp records the combined electrical activity from roughly 1 million neurons in the underlying cortex. The slow oscillations you see on an EEG display, theta rhythms around 5 to 7 cycles per second, delta waves at 1 to 4 cycles per second. These oscillations emerge from something. They're not generated randomly. They have structure, pattern, temporal organization. Beneath these classical frequencies occurring at scales 1 billion times higher, quantum processes might be orchestrating the classical rhythms we observe. This is what the Penrose-Hameroff orchestrated objective reduction theory proposes, a framework developed by mathematical physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff beginning in the early 1990s. The theory proposes that microtubules within neurons maintain quantum coherence at physiological temperatures. That this quantum coherence generates Orch OR moments, discrete instances of unified conscious experience occurring roughly 40 times per second. According to this theoretical model, these Orch OR moments could generate the phenomenal conscious moment you experience, and that the interference patterns of these quantum collapses, the resonances and harmonics of orchestrated quantum vibrations across your brain, produce the classical brain waves we measure with EEG technology. In other words, the classical brain waves you might see on an EEG readout are the echo of quantum reality, the macroscopic shadow cast by microscopic quantum vibrations. The neurons are like a speaker vibrating, and the brain waves are like the sound waves it produces. But the real music, the source of the pattern, is the quantum oscillation inside the speaker. In this interpretation, the real computation may be happening at deeper quantum scales. Imagine yourself standing on a serene beach at dusk, surrounded by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. The air is filled with an ethereal light, as if the very essence of bioluminescence has descended upon this place. This scene may evoke feelings of wonder and awe within you. But have you ever stopped to consider what lies beneath the surface of this breathtaking display? The hard problem of consciousness poses a profound question. Why does any of it feel like anything from the inside? Why do we experience subjective sensations, emotions, and thoughts that are uniquely our own? It's as if there's an inner light, a spark within us that sets our consciousness ablaze. But what is this spark, and how does it come to be? Some researchers propose that consciousness might emerge from quantum processes in the brain. This idea may seem radical, but it's one that's been gaining traction in recent years. The Penrose-Hameroff orchestrated objective reduction theory suggests that microtubules within neurons could be maintaining quantum coherence at physiological temperatures. This coherence gives rise to what are called Orch OR moments, discrete instances of unified conscious experience occurring roughly 40 times per second. According to this theoretical model, these Orch OR moments could generate the phenomenal conscious moment you experience. The interference patterns of these quantum collapses, the resonances and harmonics of orchestrated quantum vibrations across your brain produce the classical brain waves we measure with EEG technology. It's as if the real computation is happening at deeper quantum scales. Think of it this way: imagine standing on that beach once more. But now visualize a sea of tiny organisms, each producing photons at specific wavelengths, creating an integrated pattern of illumination that creates the visual effect you see. Similarly, your classical brain waves might be the visible expression of billions of quantum oscillations happening in microtubular structures throughout your brain. But what if this is only the tip of the iceberg? What if there's more to consciousness than our current understanding can explain? The story of discovering quantum frequencies in biological systems is relatively recent, spanning perhaps the last 15 to 20 years of intensive research. And it began with a puzzle that shouldn't have been puzzling once you think about it carefully. Photosynthesis, plants, and photosynthetic bacteria convert light energy into biochemical energy with extraordinary efficiency, around 95 to 97 by sophisticated measurements. This is remarkable because it approaches the theoretical quantum limits of efficiency predicted by physics, the maximum possible efficiency any system could achieve. How could evolution achieve this level of efficiency? The conventional explanation suggested that classical processes, ordinary chemical reactions without quantum effects, should only achieve around 70 to 80 efficiency, leaving a persistent 10 to 25 unaccounted for. Where did the extra efficiency come from? When researchers began investigating carefully using spectroscopic techniques and quantum theoretical modeling, they discovered the answer was quantum tunneling and quantum coherence. Photosynthetic systems don't actually route energy by classical diffusion. Instead, they maintain quantum superposition, allowing energy to explore multiple possible pathways through the photosynthetic machinery simultaneously, like water testing every possible path through a maze at once, then selecting the most efficient route. This happens in the warm, wet cytoplasm of living plant cells in conditions that conventional quantum theory said were impossible for quantum coherence. This discovery was controversial when first proposed, but the evidence accumulated through multiple independent studies and replications. The story doesn't end there. Birds migrate thousands of miles using accurate magnetic field detection. And when researchers examined the proteins in bird eyes, they found evidence of quantum entanglement. Particles in these proteins, specifically in light-sensitive molecules in specialized bird retinal cells, existed in correlated quantum states that allowed detection of subtle magnetic field gradients far beyond what classical physics would permit. Again, this was happening in warm, wet biological conditions in living animal brains. Your sense of smell, your ability to distinguish and detect thousands of distinct odors and combinations of odors appears to involve quantum tunneling in olfactory receptor proteins. Electrons tunnel through molecular barriers in ways that classical molecular mechanics cannot explain, allowing sensitivity to molecular structures that classical chemical recognition shouldn't permit. This mounting evidence of quantum biology creating functional advantages for living organisms created a conceptual opening, a paradigm shift. If nature had evolved mechanisms to harness quantum effects in photosynthesis, in bird navigation, in olfaction, then why not in the brain? Why not in the very neural structures that gave rise to consciousness itself? Some theorists then proposed that this possibility could extend to consciousness, not as proven fact, but as an investigable scientific hypothesis. This logical question led researchers back to something neuroscientist Stuart Hameroff had been studying carefully for decades: microtubules. These structures found in virtually every cell, but particularly abundant in neurons where they form the cytoskeleton, had long been considered merely passive cytoskeletal scaffolding, structural supports giving cells their shape and rigidity. They gave cells their form, helped transport materials along their length, provided structural support, resisting mechanical stress. But Hameroff and others suspected that microtubules might do something far more interesting, something more functionally important than structural support. Inside these hollow cylindrical tubes made of precisely arranged protein subunits called tubulin might be the perfect biological environment for quantum coherence. The tubulin proteins contain electron-rich regions, hydrophobic pockets, precisely arranged geometric latitudes that could potentially support quantum processes, protect them from environmental decoherence, allow them to persist. When physicists and neuroscientists studied this structure carefully, when they began running detailed quantum mechanical calculations about whether quantum states could maintain coherence within microtubules at body temperature, something unexpected emerged. The answer was yes, not easily, not without specific architectural features, but yes. The geometric arrangement, the presence of electron-rich regions, the natural isolation from environmental decoherence provided by the protein structure, all combine to create what amounts to a biological quantum computer. And this quantum computer is located in every neuron in your brain, potentially thousands or millions across your entire brain, operating simultaneously, all coordinating their quantum states through gap junctions and potentially through quantum entanglement. If consciousness were to emerge from quantum processes in microtubules, then this would imply a form of quantum processing power within the brain. Each neuron with potentially thousands of microtubules, each microtubule capable of maintaining quantum coherence for biologically relevant time scales and performing quantum computations. Billions of neurons network together through synaptic connections, through gap junctions that directly connect neighboring neurons, and potentially through quantum entanglement that connects microtubules across distances that would seem to violate classical physics. The computational substrate for consciousness under this interpretation is not classical, it's quantum. And quantum computation is fundamentally different from classical computation in ways that might be essential to consciousness itself. A classical computer operates on bits, zeros and ones, at any given moment. Each bit is definitively in one state or the other. No middle ground, no ambiguity. A quantum computer, however, operates on qubits which can exist in superposition in all possible states simultaneously until measurement collapses them into definite values. A quantum computer can explore exponentially more possibilities, exponentially more potential solutions, exponentially more potential conscious states than a classical computer of the same physical size. Imagine a cylinder made of protein. Not a solid cylinder, but a hollow tube composed of thousands of smaller protein molecules, arranged in a precise three-dimensional lattice like a molecular fence surrounding an empty space. These protein molecules are dimers of tubulin, specifically alpha and beta tubulin subunits that pair together. They fit together with exquisite precision, forming the walls of the microtubule in a highly ordered geometric pattern. But inside this geometric structure is something remarkable from a quantum perspective. The tubulin proteins contain hydrophobic regions, areas that repel water and create isolated pockets within the protein structure. Within these pockets, electrons can become duized, spreading across regions of the protein, rather than being bound tightly to specific atoms. This deioization means the electrons exist in a state of quantum superposition in multiple locations simultaneously, following quantum probability distributions rather than classical trajectories. Additionally, tubulin contains tryptophan molecules with electron-rich indole rings, spaced approximately 2 nanometers apart throughout its structure. This precise arrangement creates an environment where quantum effects could theoretically propagate and persist. The structure of the microtubule, in other words, appears almost specifically designed to support quantum coherence. When physicists and neuroscientists studied this structure carefully, when they began running detailed quantum mechanical calculations about whether quantum states could maintain coherence within microtubules at body temperature, something unexpected emerged. The answer was yes. Not easily, not without specific architectural features, but yes. The geometric arrangement, the presence of electron-rich regions, the natural isolation from environmental decoherence provided by the protein structure, all combine to create what amounts to a biological quantum computer. And this quantum computer is located in every neuron in your brain, potentially thousands of them, millions across your entire brain, operating simultaneously, all coordinating their quantum states through gap junctions and potentially through quantum entanglement. If consciousness were to emerge from quantum processes in microtubules, then this would imply a form of quantum processing power within the brain. Each neuron with potentially thousands of microtubules, each microtubule capable of maintaining quantum coherence for biologically relevant time scales and performing quantum computations. Billions of neurons network together through synaptic connections, through gap junctions that directly connect neighboring neurons, and potentially through quantum entanglement that connects microtubules across distances. The computational substrate for consciousness under this interpretation is not classical, it's quantum. And quantum computation is fundamentally different from classical computation in ways that might be essential to consciousness itself. A classical computer operates on bits, zeros and ones. At any given moment, each bit is definitively in one state or the other. No middle ground, no ambiguity. A quantum computer operates on qubits, which can exist in superposition in all possible states simultaneously until measurement collapses them into definite values. A quantum computer can explore exponentially more possibilities, exponentially more potential solutions, exponentially more potential conscious states than a classical computer of the same physical size. This exponential power is why quantum consciousness, if supported by future evidence, might explain aspects of consciousness that pure classical models struggle with. The richness and subtlety of subjective experience, the apparent unity of consciousness despite arising from billions of separately firing neurons, the creative flexibility of human thought and imagination. All of these might be reflections of underlying quantum computation accessing vast solution spaces. The binding problem, the long-standing neuroscientific mystery of how disparate sensory information from different brain regions is integrated into unified experience, may find possible explanatory models in quantum entanglement mechanisms. Quantum information isn't localized to single locations, it's distributed, correlated instantaneously, interconnected across distances. If consciousness involves quantum processing in microtubules distributed throughout your brain, then binding all that information into a unified conscious moment becomes straightforward. Theoretically, it's not a mystery requiring new classical mechanisms or explaining away as mere illusion. In this theoretical context, it's what quantum systems naturally tend to do. The biggest objection to quantum consciousness, the wall that stopped many scientists from taking it seriously, comes down to a simple phrase: warm, wet, and noisy. This phrase, first popularized by physicist Chris Coe and others in the neuroscience community, encapsulates the fundamental problem that quantum consciousness faced as a theoretical proposition. Classical quantum systems require isolation, extreme cold protection from environmental interference. A quantum computer in a laboratory operates at temperatures close to absolute zero, sometimes colder than outer space, around 1/110th of a degree above absolute zero or even lower. At these frigid temperatures, atoms move slowly, vibrations are minimized, thermal noise is suppressed to nearly nothing. The quantum states are maintained in carefully controlled vacuum chambers, isolated from vibrations and electromagnetic radiation, shielded from any stray environmental interactions. The brain, by contrast, operates at 37 degrees Celsius, warm as a summer day. It's soaked in water, a medium that conducts heat and creates thermal motion. It's filled with ions and proteins and metabolites, creating an electrically noisy environment. There are constant chemical reactions happening, constant molecular motion, constant heat dissipation. The prevailing assumption for decades was that quantum coherence couldn't survive in such conditions. If you tried to maintain a quantum computer in a warm, wet environment, quantum physicists said it would immediately decohere. The quantum superposition would collapse into classical states within fractions of a pico, faster than you could blink, faster than you could think. The theory seemed airtight, but later findings in quantum biology suggested that this assumption might be incomplete. What changed was evidence from quantum biology, from organisms themselves. When researchers began finding quantum effects in photosynthesis, in the light harvesting complexes of plants, they had to reconcile these findings with the theoretical prohibition against warm-wet quantum effects. Photosynthesis happened in the warm-wet cytoplasm of living plant cells. Bird navigation used quantum effects in proteins exposed to body temperature. The olfactory system of mammals seemed to employ quantum tunneling at physiological temperatures. These findings from nature forced a theoretical reconsideration. The reconciliation came gradually through detailed computational modeling of how quantum systems could be protected within biological structures, how the architecture of proteins and lipids could potentially insulate quantum information from environmental decoherence. Then, through direct experimental observation, researchers began conducting careful experiments. They shined light into microtubules and measured how long the quantum signal persisted. They used sophisticated optical techniques to track quantum coherence in tubulin proteins. The results astonished many in the scientific community. Quantum coherence lasted far longer than classical physics predicted in some cases optical excitations propagated through microtubules for hundreds of milliseconds to seconds, orders of magnitude longer than the femtocon time scales that had suggested. The quantum state didn't collapse, it persisted, it propagated, it seemed to be maintained by the structure of the microtubule itself, protected by the geometric arrangement of proteins, by hydrophobic regions that isolated quantum information. The warm, wet environment of the cell didn't destroy quantum coherence. In some cases, research suggests it may even help to preserve it through mechanisms still being investigated. Evolution over billions of years had discovered how to build biological systems that maintained quantum effects despite conditions that would destroy artificial quantum computers. This discovery, this fundamental paradigm shift in what was theoretically possible in warm biological systems, opened the floodgates for serious investigation into quantum consciousness. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a profound scientific discovery, one that has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, waiting to be uncovered by courageous researchers who dared to challenge conventional wisdom. Something had to give. Either the theory was incomplete or the experiments were misinterpreted. The resolution came not from philosophical debate, but from direct measurement, from clever experimental design that could actually observe quantum frequencies in microtubular tissue. The challenge of measuring quantum coherence in microtubules at body temperature is immense, almost insurmountable when you first think about it. You can't simply stick a probe into living tissue without disrupting what you're trying to measure. Any invasive measurement device generates heat, introduces noise, potentially destroys the very quantum coherence you're attempting to observe. It's like trying to measure the position of an electron without affecting it. Like trying to observe a dream without waking the dreamer. You're caught in a paradox. To know that the quantum system exists, you have to observe it. But the act of observation destroys what you're trying to observe. This is called the measurement problem, and it's been central to quantum physics for a century. But there's an elegant solution that physicists have developed over decades of quantum experimentation, a technique as fundamental to quantum science as the telescope was to astronomy. A method that seems to transcend this paradox: light, specifically laser light, at precisely controlled wavelengths directed through biological tissue in ways that allow quantum states to reveal themselves through fluorescence measurements. It's non-invasive. It doesn't require cutting into tissue. It allows you to listen to what the quantum system is doing from the outside. When you shine ultraviolet or visible light into biological tissue, when you excite electrons within proteins to higher energy states, those electrons exist in this excited state for a brief moment. Then they cascade back down to lower energy states by emitting photons, by emitting light. This emission process happens incredibly quickly. But the timing of this emission, the wavelength of the light emitted, the pattern of decay over time, all contain information about the quantum state of the electrons, about how they were behaving before they collapsed. This is fluorescent lifetime spectroscopy. It's like putting a quantum stethoscope up to biological tissue and listening to its heartbeat, listening to its frequency signature. In the hands of researchers like Greg Scholes at Princeton and Jack Tazinski at the University of Alberta, it became a window into the quantum nature of microtubules. It became a tool for actually observing the frequencies we'd only theorized about before, only calculated mathematically. Imagine shining a laser beam, ultraviolet light at a specific wavelength directly into a sample of microtubules extracted from neurons. The light excites electrons within the tubulin proteins. These electrons exist in a superposition of quantum states. They're oscillating between different energy levels, tunneling through molecular barriers, exploring multiple quantum pathways simultaneously. Then they collapse. They cascade down to lower energy states, and in doing so they emit light. They emit photons that you can detect with sensitive instruments. Now here's where the quantum part becomes visible. If those electrons were behaving classically, if quantum effects weren't present, the light would be emitted very quickly, almost instantaneously within picoseconds or at most nanoseconds. The classical prediction was phenoseconds, mere trillionths of a second. But that's not what the researchers observed when Tazinski's team shined ultraviolet light into microtubules. when they measured the fluorescent lifetimes. When they tracked how long the quantum excitations persisted before collapsing, they found coherence lasting for nanoseconds. 5 nanoseconds. That's thousands of times longer than classical physics predicted. 5 nanoseconds might not sound like much in everyday terms, but think about it in context. A nanosecond is 1/1000th of a second. 5 nanoseconds is 5/1000th of a second. Yet that duration, an absolute eternity in the quantum realm, is biologically relevant. It's considered potentially consciousness relevant within the frameworks that explore quantum models of mind. At Princeton, Greg Scholes and Arat Kalra conducted complementary experiments using tryptophan fluorescent lifetimes, techniques that had previously been used to study photosynthetic complexes. They studied the specific quantum properties of tryptophan molecules within tubulin, the electron-rich indole rings that are distributed throughout the protein structure. These tryptophans, these electron-rich pockets, are arranged throughout the tubulin molecule with remarkable precision, spaced approximately 2 nanometers apart throughout the three-dimensional structure. 2 nanometers is essentially the quantum scale where effects begin to emerge. This spacing isn't accidental. It may have been optimized through natural evolutionary constraints to facilitate quantum coherence propagation. The tubulin protein appears almost engineered for quantum processing. When Scholes and Kalra excited tryptophan fluorescence in microtubules, when they measured how long the quantum states persisted, they found something equally striking. Laser-induced optical excitations propagated far further through microtubules than expected. They didn't degrade rapidly, they persisted. The quantum information carried by these excitations didn't collapse into classical noise. Instead, it propagated through the crystalline lattice of tubulin protein for distances that suggested genuine quantum coherence, not classical energy transfer. The signal didn't weaken. It carried information across the protein structure. At the University of Central Florida, Ariscaru's team conducted perhaps the most elegant experiment of all. They shined visible light into one end of a microtubule sample and measured how long it took for that light to be remitted from the other end. In classical systems, you'd expect rapid attenuation. The light would be absorbed, scattered, lost in the warm, wet, noisy biological environment. But that's not what happened. The microtubules showed remission of light persisting for hundreds of milliseconds, even up to seconds. Let that sink in. Seconds from a quantum system in a warm biological environment at body temperature. The implications were staggering. These observations suggested organized quantum patterns persisting in biological tissue far longer than expected. Something about the structure of microtubules, something about how evolution had arranged these protein lattices was protecting and facilitating quantum coherence. The geometry was right. The chemistry was right. The architecture was optimized for quantum information processing. But measurements alone don't prove consciousness. They demonstrate quantum effects. They show that microtubules can maintain coherent states. But they don't directly show that these states generate consciousness. That connection required a different experimental approach, a different kind of evidence. That's where the anesthesia studies entered the picture with extraordinary power. Think about what anesthesia actually does. When you go under general anesthesia, consciousness vanishes. Not gradually, suddenly. One moment you're aware, talking to the anesthesiologist, forming thoughts and memories, perhaps slightly anxious about the upcoming procedure. Then the anesthetic agent is administered. The mask is placed over your face or the drug enters your bloodstream, and within seconds consciousness collapses completely. You have no experience of the time passing. No sense of duration, no continuity. Your last conscious thought simply ends, and your next conscious moment occurs hours later in recovery. It's the most complete, most reliable way to eliminate consciousness that medicine possesses. The mechanism has always been mysterious. Anesthetics are chemically diverse. They have different molecular structures, different chemical properties. Ether is organic. Propel is organic. Nitrous oxide is inorganic. Xenon is an inert gas. What do they have in common? How do all these chemically distinct compounds produce the same effect? For decades, the leading theory suggested that anesthetics worked by disrupting the physical properties of cell membranes, by altering the fluidity of lipid bilayers that surround neurons. The theory proposed that anesthetics physically blocked neural communication by changing membrane properties. This theory made intuitive sense, but had a persistent problem. The concentrations of anesthetics required to significantly alter membrane fluidity as measured in laboratory experiments were higher than the concentrations that actually induced unconsciousness. There was a gap, an inconsistency. Something else was happening, something more specific, something more fundamental to the nature of consciousness itself. In 2024, research from Wellesley College offered a radical answer. Professor Mike Wust and a team of undergraduate researchers designed an experiment to test whether anesthetics work specifically by disrupting microtubules. The logic was elegant. If consciousness depends on quantum coherence in microtubules, then anything that disrupts that coherence should disrupt consciousness. They worked with rats, measuring the precise timing of loss of consciousness under anesthesia. They used isoflurane, a common inhaled general anesthetic used in clinical medicine, the same compound that has been used safely for decades. The experimental design was straightforward but clever. One group of rats received the anesthetic alone. Another group of rats received the anesthetic along with a drug that specifically binds to microtubules and stabilizes their structure, preventing the normal dynamic assembly and disassembly of these structures. The stabilizing drug protects microtubules from collapsing, maintains their architecture. If anesthetics work by disrupting microtubular quantum coherence, then stabilizing microtubules should delay the onset of unconsciousness. The quantum coherence would be preserved and consciousness should persist longer. If anesthetics work through other mechanisms unrelated to microtubules, if they work by disrupting membranes or by blocking neural firing or through some other classical mechanism, then the stabilizing drug should have no effect. The results were unambiguous. The rats that received microtubular stabilizing drugs took significantly longer to lose consciousness. They maintained their writing reflex, their ability to restore normal posture after being placed on their backs for substantially longer than the control group. The anesthetic was present. It was entering their brains. The drug was circulating through their blood, but the microtubular stabilizing drugs delayed unconsciousness, delayed the onset of insensitivity to stimuli, delayed the collapse of consciousness. This suggested a potential causal link, specifically involving quantum processes in microtubules, not disruption of membranes or other more general cellular mechanisms. This finding has been interpreted by many researchers as significant preliminary evidence supporting this theoretical model. For those working in quantum consciousness research, it was considered a watershed moment. Philosophical debates within those circles shifted heavily toward this interpretation rather than being universally concluded. Consider what this implies. If consciousness depends on maintaining quantum coherence in microtubules, then disrupting this coherence should eliminate consciousness. According to this interpretation, anesthetics somehow interfere with quantum processes in microtubules, preventing the orchestrated oscillations from maintaining their coherence. The orchestrated objective reduction moments cannot form. The conscious experience collapses. And when you stabilize microtubules, when you protect their quantum coherence with drugs that maintain their structure and prevent decoherence, consciousness persists despite the presence of anesthetic agents. The causality proposed here is theoretical rather than definitively established. The quantum frequency underlying consciousness can be disrupted, and when it is, consciousness ends. As you listen to this, as you consider what this means for your own consciousness right now in this present moment, consider that one interpretation suggests your awareness persists because your microtubules maintain their quantum coherence right now in billions of neurons throughout your brain. Quantum oscillations are happening. Frequencies are oscillating in a coordinated, orchestrated way. Coherence is being maintained despite the warm, wet, noisy environment that should theoretically destroy it. Every second of your conscious experience, every moment of awareness, every thought you're having right now depends on these frequencies continuing to oscillate, continuing to maintain coherence, continuing to bind information into unified conscious moments. Without this coherence within this theoretical framework, your subjective experience would vanish instantly. It would be like turning off the lights in a theater. You are conscious because your microtubules maintain in their quantum coherence right now in billions of neurons throughout your brain. Quantum oscillations are happening. Frequencies are oscillating in a coordinated, orchestrated way. Coherence is being maintained despite the warm, wet, noisy environment that should theoretically destroy it. Every second of your conscious experience, every moment of awareness, every thought you're having right now depends on these frequencies continuing to oscillate, continuing to maintain coherence, continuing to bind information into unified conscious moments. Without this coherence within this theoretical framework, your subjective experience would vanish instantly. It would be like turning off the lights in a theater. The entire show would go dark. Your consciousness would disappear just as it does when anesthetics override the system. Just as it does when anesthesia stops the quantum frequencies from being maintained. From this quantum-based interpretive perspective, this is what consciousness depends on. It represents one model of what you're made of from the quantum perspective. Now, when researchers talk about frequency signatures of consciousness, they're not talking about a single frequency. They're not saying consciousness is a 40 Hz phenomenon or exclusively anything. They're talking about a symphony of frequencies, a complex harmonic relationship between oscillations at multiple scales simultaneously, all working together, all coordinated. This is crucial to understand because many people think about consciousness too simply. They think of it as one thing happening at one frequency. But it's not that simple. Consciousness isn't a monochromatic phenomenon. It's polyphonic, it's symphonic. It's not a single note. It's a chord. An agreement between multiple frequencies working together in harmonic relationship, creating something greater than any individual frequency could create alone. There's the extremely high-frequency quantum vibration happening in megahertz ranges within the microtubules themselves. The fundamental quantum oscillations of tubular electrons. The vibration of electron clouds in hydrophobic pockets. There's the orchestrated collapse of these quantum states, occurring roughly 40 times per second, creating discrete conscious moments, discrete units of awareness, individual frames in the film of consciousness. And there's the integration of these moments through the emergence of classical brain waves that we measure on electroencephalography, or as your doctors might show you on a readout if you underwent a sleep study or had a brain scan. When you see a gamma rhythm on an EEG readout, you're seeing a 30 to 100 Hz oscillation, electrical activity rippling across your brain at these frequencies, waves of synchronized neural firing. What you might not realize is that you're seeing the visible expression of underlying quantum frequencies averaging down through interference and resonance patterns. The microtubular vibrations in the megahertz range happening in millions of neurons simultaneously interfere with each other, creating beat frequencies at lower scales through harmonic resonance. These beat frequencies cascade upward into the classical frequencies we can measure with scalp electrodes. The consciousness you experience, the subjective reality of your awareness in this moment, is described in some interpretations as the unified coherence of all these frequencies aligned together, orchestrated into a single coherent pattern from the deepest quantum levels all the way up to the macroscopic brain waves. According to the orchestrated objective reduction theory, consciousness doesn't emerge continuously. It emerges in discrete moments, or moments occurring roughly 40 times per second. That's roughly one conscious moment every 25 milliseconds. Between these moments, between these discrete collapses of quantum superposition, your consciousness momentarily ceases. It's like a cinematic experience, like a film made of still frames projected rapidly enough that your perception integrates them into apparent continuity, except it's not a film. It's reality selecting which possibilities become actual through quantum collapse. Each collapse represents a conscious moment, a discrete experience, a now. Quantum selection happening 40 times per second. And these 40 discrete moments per second strung together through the continuity of memory and the binding of information through quantum entanglement, creates the flowing stream of consciousness you experience as continuous awareness. Your consciousness moment by moment within this theoretical framework is treated as a quantum event. The number 40 isn't arbitrary. It's not a coincidence that this frequency repeatedly appears in consciousness research. Gamma oscillations at around 40 Hz, What researchers call the 40 Has phenomenon have been repeatedly observed correlating with unified conscious experience, when different aspects of sensory information must be bound together. When you must experience red and round and smooth simultaneously as a unified perception of an apple, gamma oscillations increase. Multiple brain regions that process these different aspects synchronize at 40 Hz. The binding happens at this frequency. Why specifically 40? Some interpretation suggests the answer seems rooted in the balance between processing speed and coherence maintenance. Faster oscillations would allow more information processing per second, but they would also require more energy, more precise orchestration across vast neural networks spanning the entire cerebral cortex. Slower oscillations would be easier to coordinate. They would require less quantum coherence, but they would process less information per second. They would bind fewer aspects of experience into each unified conscious moment. The quality of consciousness would be diminished, less rich, less integrated. 40 Hz is proposed in this model as the sweet spot, the optimal frequency that evolution discovered through millions of years of neurological development. At this frequency, quantum coherence can be maintained across the necessary neural networks, despite the warm, wet, noisy environment. Discrete conscious moments can be generated at a biologically useful rate, and the binding of information into unified experience can occur with sufficient scope and richness to generate what we recognize as conscious awareness. Different types of conscious experience might involve different frequency ratios and harmonics. The specific frequency signature changes. It's like an instrument tuning itself to different keys for different pieces of music. When you're in deep meditation, when your consciousness becomes quieter, more focused inward, the frequency patterns in your brain change noticeably, measurably in ways that neuroscience has documented for decades. The dominant oscillations shift to lower frequencies. Theta and alpha rhythms become more pronounced rolling rhythms at 5 to 13 Hz, slow waves of oscillation washing across the cortex. This corresponds to altered states of consciousness, to different qualities of awareness, to consciousness that has a different binding pattern, a different integration of experience. When you're intensely focused concentrating on a complex task, solving a difficult problem, understanding something intellectually, understanding these very words, gamma oscillations increase dramatically. The frequency signature shifts higher. The binding becomes more intense, more concentrated, more precise. In this interpretation, higher frequency moments contain greater information content, more detailed conscious experience. When you're dreaming during sleep, when consciousness becomes creative and associative, when it becomes freed from logical constraints, yet another pattern emerges entirely. The frequency relationship between different brain regions changes fundamentally. The synchronization loosens. The binding becomes looser, more associative, more fluid. The rigid binding that creates the logical consistency of waking consciousness that keeps things organized and orderly gives way to a more fluid binding that creates the dream logic of surreal dream consciousness, where things transform and blend and logic doesn't apply. Different conscious states are literally different frequency signatures. Your consciousness, metaphorically speaking, is tuning its frequencies in response to the demands of the situation as interpreted through this quantum frequency framework to what your brain needs to accomplish in that moment. This is why anesthetics work so reliably, so universally despite their chemical diversity. They don't simply suppress neural firing in a crude way. They may selectively interfere with the frequency coordination between microtubules across different neurons, breaking the orchestration. They interfere with the coherence maintenance mechanism. The quantum coherence can't be maintained at the 40 Hz frequency that consciousness is proposed to require in this theoretical framework. The coherence fragments into incoherence. The binding mechanism fails. The orchestrated objective reduction moments cannot occur, and without these moments, without the discrete quantum collapses that generate consciousness, there is no conscious moment, there is no awareness, there is no experience. There is only the continued biological firing of neurons, without any experiential content, without any lights on inside, without any sense of being. This mechanism is suggested to potentially help explain why anesthesia is so effective at producing unconsciousness, without necessarily stopping all neural activity. The brain doesn't have to shut down calmly, it doesn't have to stop functioning. The heart still beats the blood, still circulates the lungs, still breathe. Neural firing can continue at lower levels, reflexes can persist, the body's autonomic systems continue functioning, maintaining life support. You know that moment when you're fully engaged with something, completely absorbed in it. That's not just a feeling, but a very specific state of consciousness. It's as if your awareness has expanded to encompass every detail, every nuance, and every aspect of what you're experiencing. This is why anesthetics work so reliably, even though they affect the brain in different ways. They don't simply suppress neural activity. Instead, they may selectively interfere with the complex frequency coordination between microtubules across neurons. Think about it: altered states of consciousness, different qualities of awareness, and consciousness that has a unique binding pattern, integrating experience in a distinct way. When you're intensely focused or concentrated on something, gamma oscillations increase dramatically, shifting your frequency signature higher. This is when the binding becomes more intense, precise, and connected. It's as if your conscious experience contains more detailed information. But what happens during sleep? When consciousness becomes creative and associative, dreamlike, and freed from logical constraints, the frequency relationship between brain regions changes fundamentally. Synchronization loosens, and the binding becomes looser, more fluid. This creates a surreal dream logic where things transform and blend, defying classical logic. Different conscious states are like different frequency signatures. Your consciousness is tuning its frequencies in response to the situation, interpreting what your brain needs at that moment. It's not just about suppressing neural firing, it's about affecting the complex interplay of frequencies and oscillations within your brain. This might be why anesthetics work so reliably, despite their diverse chemical makeup. But here's a fascinating aspect: the frequencies we've measured are just the beginning. They're like the visible spectrum of light, accounting for only a tiny fraction of all possible electromagnetic radiation. The full reality underlying your consciousness almost certainly extends far beyond what we've observed into infrared scales, terahertz scales, and perhaps even scales that haven't been named yet. Your awareness is riding waves of quantum frequency orchestrated across scales, from these unmeasured depths up through megahertz, through the classical Hertz scale brain waves, creating the subjective experience of being you. They create your consciousness, your awareness, this present moment. Yet there exist unmeasured frequencies we discussed earlier, terahertz scales, and beyond, hidden in a realm of biological quantum processing that remains almost entirely invisible to our current instruments and understanding. The question driving quantum consciousness research forward is deceptively simple. If consciousness exists as a multi-scale frequency symphony, then how does the brain maintain quantum coherence across these multiple domains simultaneously in an environment that should theoretically destroy it? The answer lies in the remarkable sophistication of biological systems that evolution has perfected over billions of years. For decades, physicists assumed quantum processes required extreme isolation, cold, and absence of disturbance. Yet, nature thrives on quantum principles in exactly those conditions we thought would destroy them. Photosynthesis in plants operates at nearly perfect efficiency, converting 95% of absorbed light energy into chemical energy through quantum processes occurring at room temperature. Imagine what that means: 95% efficiency. Operating at the theoretical quantum limit using quantum tunneling and superposition, and entanglement occurring in warm, green summer leaves. Photons strike the photosynthetic reaction center, creating excited electron states that travel through complex protein architecture to transfer their energy efficiently to chemical machinery, converting light into sugar. A classical system would explore one route. A quantum system explores all possible pathways simultaneously, sampling all routes in parallel to find the most efficient path without ever calculating which one was best. The randomness and thermal motion become part of the mechanism protecting quantum coherence, enhancing its maintenance through orchestrated protein architecture. The conventional engineering approach would isolate your quantum system, cool it down, protect it from disturbance. But evolution discovered that warmth and water and noise can be used as quantum resources rather than obstacles to overcome. Life has learned how to use these natural phenomena in the same way we surf waves or ride currents, by orchestrating them through careful protein architecture. Birds navigating continents rely on quantum effects in specialized proteins within their eyes to sense the Earth's magnetic field with extraordinary precision, something that no classical system could match. Think about what this means. A bird flying thousands of miles somehow knows which direction to travel with precision our technology struggled to achieve until recently. The answer to how nature preserves quantum coherence in warm, wet biological environments lies in its remarkable sophistication and the way life has learned to harness quantum principles to thrive. This is not just theoretical, it's an active area of research with ongoing discoveries that challenge our understanding of what's possible in living tissue. As you stand at the threshold of a profound discovery, consider this: your consciousness exists as a multiscale frequency symphony, with different regions of your brain vibrating at distinct frequencies. But how does it maintain quantum coherence across these multiple domains simultaneously in an environment that should theoretically destroy it? The answer lies in the remarkable sophistication of biological systems that evolution has spent billions of years perfecting. For decades, physicists assumed that quantum processes required extreme isolation, cold temperatures, and absence of disturbance. Yet nature thrives on quantum principles exactly where we thought they would be destroyed. Photosynthesis in plants operates at nearly perfect efficiency, converting over 95% of absorbed light energy into chemical energy through quantum processes occurring at room temperature. Imagine what that means: 95% efficiency. The theoretical quantum limit for energy transfer is around 100. Plants are operating at the quantum limit, using quantum tunneling and superposition, and entanglement occurring in the warm greenery of summer leaves. Photons strike the photosynthetic reaction center, creating excited electron states that must travel through a complex protein architecture to transfer their energy efficiently. A classical system would take one pathway, explore one route through the protein's structure, but a quantum system through superposition explores all possible pathways simultaneously, sampling all routes in parallel and finding the most efficient path without ever calculating which one was best. The randomness, thermal motion, and noise that would seem to destroy quantum coherence actually become part of the mechanism protecting it. In photosynthetic centers, researchers call environmental noise that enhances quantum coherence maintenance. It's as if the biological system is surfing the waves of thermal noise, using it as a vehicle for quantum information transport rather than suffering from it as an obstacle. Evolution has discovered how to implement quantum information processing in every environment where life exists. This isn't isolated or exceptional, it's precedent-setting. Birds navigating across continents rely on quantum effects in specialized proteins within their eyes to sense the Earth's magnetic field with extraordinary precision. No classical system could match. The cryptochrome proteins in bird photoreceptors appear to use quantum tunneling and entanglement to create a biological compass that operates with sensitivity. Think about what this means. A bird flying across thousands of miles somehow knows which direction to travel with precision that would require instruments our technology struggled to achieve until recently. Sea turtles, too, seem to use similar quantum mechanisms for their migrations across open ocean, returning to the exact beach where they were born decades earlier with precision almost incomprehensible. Your own sense of smell involves quantum tunneling as olfactory receptors distinguish between molecules based on quantum effects related to electron tunneling, not simply classical shape matching. Luca Turin proposed that the distinctive scent of objects may be encoded in their vibrational frequency of electron clouds, and olfactory receptors would essentially be quantum sensors detecting these vibrations. This explains why you can detect extraordinarily subtle differences in odor, why your sense of smell is so acute compared to what classical biology would predict. Your olfactory neurons are quantum sensors, and all this occurs in the warm, wet, noisy biological environment of living tissue. Evolution has discovered how to harness quantum coherence in specific conditions where life exists. If consciousness depends on maintaining specific frequency relationships, keeping quantum coherence aligned and synchronized, then it might not be as fixed or unchangeable as we typically assume. If you could deliberately modify the frequencies in your brain, shift the harmonic relationships between different frequency scales, You might alter your conscious experience deliberately. You might access frequencies that are ordinarily inaccessible, shifting your awareness into different states, modes of consciousness, ways of binding information. This is precisely what appears to happen during meditation. Your consciousness exists as an entangled quantum field that spans your entire brain, a unified coherence that cascades downward into separate neural systems. This understanding opens up profound possibilities if you can manipulate the frequencies in your brain. You might be able to access deeper states of awareness, connect with aspects of yourself or others on a more fundamental level. The potential for transformation and growth is immense, as your consciousness becomes a tool for exploration, not just a passive observer. Consider this: your brain isn't a collection of independent oscillators. It's a unified quantum system expressing itself at multiple frequency scales simultaneously. Consciousness, from this perspective, is what it feels like from the inside, a unified field of awareness that binds together information from vastly different regions of the brain into a single, coherent experience. Take a breath now and notice how this idea resonates with your own experience of awareness. You don't feel one thing in your visual system and something entirely different in your auditory system. You experience one unified field of awareness, one you perceiving and thinking and feeling. Yet your brain is vastly distributed, processing information in parallel across billions of neurons. The unity you experience is real, the binding is complete. According to quantum consciousness theory, it's because your consciousness exists as an entangled quantum field that spans your entire brain, a unified coherence that cascades downward into separate neural systems. This is your consciousness at the frequency level, how it actually works. But here's where things become even more interesting. If you could deliberately modify the frequencies in your brain, shift the harmonic relationships between different frequency scales, you might be able to alter your conscious experience deliberately. You might access frequencies that are ordinarily inaccessible, shifting your awareness into different states, modes of consciousness, ways of binding information. This is precisely what appears to happen during meditation, a state where your mind becomes calm and focused, allowing you to tap into deeper levels of consciousness. As you continue on this journey of discovery, remember that your consciousness exists as an ever-changing, adaptive system, always seeking balance and harmony within itself and the world around it. In this understanding lies the key to unlocking your full potential, not just as a thinking, feeling being, but as a living, breathing expression of the quantum universe. You are capable of growth, transformation, and evolution. You are capable of becoming more than what you currently are. As you breathe in the possibilities that lie before you, remember that your consciousness is not fixed or unchangeable. It's dynamic, ever-changing, and always seeking balance within itself and the world around it. Your brain is a quantum system, capable of processing information at multiple frequency scales simultaneously. Consciousness, from this perspective, is what it feels like from the inside, a unified field of awareness that binds together information from vastly different regions of the brain into a single, coherent experience. Take a breath now and notice how this idea resonates with your own experience of awareness. You don't feel one thing in your visual system and something entirely different in your auditory system. You experience one unified field of awareness, one you perceiving and thinking and feeling. Yet your brain is vastly distributed, processing information in parallel across billions of neurons. The unity you experience is real, the binding is complete. According to quantum consciousness theory, it's because your consciousness exists as an entangled quantum field that spans your entire brain, a unified coherence that cascades downward into separate neural systems. This is your consciousness at the frequency level, how it actually works. But here's where things become even more interesting. If you could deliberately modify the frequencies in your brain, shift the harmonic relationships between different frequency scales, you might be able to alter your conscious experience deliberately. You might access frequencies that are ordinarily inaccessible, shifting your awareness into different states, modes of consciousness, ways of binding information. This is precisely what appears to happen during meditation, a state where your mind becomes calm and focused, allowing you to tap into deeper levels of consciousness. As you continue on this journey of discovery, remember that your consciousness exists as an ever-changing, adaptive system, always seeking balance and harmony within itself and the world around it. In this understanding lies the key to unlocking your full potential, not just as a thinking, feeling being, but as a living, breathing expression of the quantum universe. You are capable of growth, transformation, and evolution. You are capable of becoming more than what you currently are. As you breathe in the possibilities that lie before you, remember that your consciousness is not fixed or unchangeable. It's dynamic, ever-changing, and always seeking balance within itself and the world around it. Your brain is a quantum system, capable of processing information at multiple frequency scales simultaneously. Consciousness, from this perspective, is what it feels like from the inside, a unified field of awareness that binds together information from vastly different regions of the brain into a single, coherent experience. As you journey through the realms of quantum consciousness, a profound idea begins to emerge. You see that your brain isn't just a collection of independent oscillators, but rather a unified quantum system expressing itself at multiple frequency scales simultaneously. The different frequencies we discussed earlier, terahertz, megahertz, and hertz-scale oscillations, aren't independent entities, but are coupled together through deeper quantum correlations. This means that the terahertz oscillations of individual tubulin vibrations entangle across microtubular networks, producing megahertz oscillations in neural firing patterns. These, in turn, produce classical Hertz-scale brain waves we can measure. Each scale emerges from the scale below it through a quantum to classical transition, and each scale influences the others. Your consciousness is literally functioning at different frequencies, accessing different modes of quantum coherence as you navigate your daily life. But what if I told you that you have the power to deliberately modify these frequency relationships? What if you could shift your awareness into different states, different modes of consciousness, different ways of binding information? This is precisely what appears to happen during meditation, a state where your mind becomes calm and focused. For thousands of years, contemporary native traditions have described practices that transform consciousness, shifting awareness into states of expanded perception, compassion, and understanding. These aren't merely psychological changes, they may reflect shifts in the frequency signature of conscious processing, deliberate frequency modulation occurring through focused attention and specific mental practices. When researchers study the brains of expert meditators using electroencephalography, they find distinctive patterns. The dominant frequencies shift toward lower ranges. Alpha rhythms between 8 and 12 Hz become more prominent, while theta rhythms between 4 and 8 Hz increase. Simultaneously, the different brain regions show increased coherence, with frequencies in visual cortex and parietal cortex synchronizing more thoroughly. The harmonic relationships between frequencies become more stable, more organized. It's as if the normal waking consciousness, with its gamma frequency binding at 40 Hz or higher, shifts into a different mode, one that's broader, more global, less focused on sensory details, and more on the overall coherence of the system itself. This correlates with meditators' reports of expanded awareness, feeling connected to something larger than their individual self. Advanced meditators who have spent decades cultivating awareness show even more striking changes. Their brains maintain theta coherence even when eyes are open during normal waking activities. They exhibit persistent synchronization between distant brain regions, even in states that would normally show fragmented frequency signatures. These individuals have, metaphorically speaking, learned to tune their consciousness to lower frequencies, maintaining them deliberately and accessing the benefits of these altered frequency states while remaining cognitively functional. But here's where things become even more intriguing. What if individual brains have characteristic frequency signatures? What if different people's consciousness oscillates at subtly different frequencies based on their genetics, neurology, experience, and training? Then what happens when multiple brains come into proximity? When multiple people's frequency signatures begin to interact with each other? Some researchers have explored whether shared focus or shared attention might facilitate measurable synchronization between separate brains. Is it possible that groups of people could achieve something like a collective consciousness field through frequency synchronization? This is where quantum consciousness research begins to venture into territory that mainstream neuroscience finds uncomfortable. But the preliminary evidence is intriguing and warrants serious consideration, even as it remains controversial. Studies show that people meditating in groups have their individual brain frequency signatures become more synchronized than expected by chance. People sitting together begin showing similar theta and alpha oscillations, with coherence measurements indicating their brains becoming more aligned at the frequency level. The implications of this effect are enormous. If consciousness can synchronize between two people, between a group of meditators, between a community of people, all focused on shared intention, then could it potentially extend further? Could millions of people focused on a shared experience create a collective frequency field? As we continue to explore these ideas, one question remains: what happens when billions of people are focused simultaneously on shared experience and shared emotion? The Global Consciousness Project has been exploring this possibility for over 2 decades using a network of random number generators positioned around the world. While the results remain hotly debated in the scientific community, they do hint at intriguing correlations between global attention and subtle statistical anomalies. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The therapeutic implications of understanding consciousness as frequency are already becoming apparent as research progresses. As we delve deeper into this fascinating topic, one thing becomes clear: your brain is a powerful tool that can be shaped and reshaped through deliberate practice and focused intention. The possibilities for personal growth and transformation are vast, and it's up to you to explore them. Imagine a group of people sitting in close proximity, meditating together. As they focus their minds on a shared experience, something remarkable begins to happen. Their brains start to synchronize at similar frequencies, and coherence measurements show that the consciousness fields begin to resonate with each other. These findings are preliminary, but they suggest that when individuals come together with shared intention, their consciousness genuinely synchronizes. The mechanisms behind this effect remain mysterious, whether it's quantum entanglement between brains or classical neural synchronization through environmental cues. But one thing is clear: something real is happening at the group level. As we explore the implications of synchronized consciousness, a fascinating possibility arises. What if millions of people focused on a shared experience, a shared intention, or a shared moment of attention could create a collective frequency field? The Global Consciousness Project has been exploring this idea for over 2 decades using a network of random number generators positioned around the world. This line of inquiry is speculative and remains highly debated in the scientific community. But what if consciousness can influence quantum processes at the individual level, as some theories propose? Would moments of intense global attention correlate with subtle statistical anomalies, creating a kind of collective frequency pattern in the environment? When we look at the data from the Global Consciousness Project, it's clear that there are intriguing correlations, but also ambiguity and controversy. Some analyses show statistically significant patterns suggesting connections between human consciousness and physical systems. Other analyses find nothing when the same data is examined differently. As researchers continue to explore this phenomenon, they're beginning to uncover some remarkable implications. For example, if neurological and psychiatric conditions involve disruptions to normal frequency synchronization, then future therapies might aim to modulate these frequencies directly. Transcranial ultrasound, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and meditation-based therapies are all being investigated as potential tools for restoring healthy frequency patterns in the brain. But what about the therapeutic implications of understanding consciousness as frequency? If we can support or influence consciousness through frequency-related interventions, then we're entering territory that raises profound questions about autonomy, identity, and human dignity. Who defines what constitutes a healthy baseline frequency signature? What happens if frequency-based modulation becomes explored not just for medical support, but for enhancement optimization or self-directed alteration? The potential to influence consciousness frequency is not inherently positive or negative. It depends entirely on intention, boundaries, consent, and safeguards. Consciousness touches personal identity at the deepest possible level, and it must be approached gently, responsibly, and with respect for personhood. But what if the frequencies we're talking about extend beyond the physical boundary of the brain? Some researchers have proposed speculative models exploring whether the terahertz and megahertz oscillations within microtubules might generate subtle electromagnetic fields extending outward from the brain. If consciousness is frequency, then your conscious experience might produce very faint electromagnetic patterns that propagate outward, symbolically expressing aspects of the internal frequency landscape. This possibility raises an extraordinary question: if millions of brains are simultaneously broadcasting their consciousness frequencies, then the space around us might be filled with overlapping consciousness frequency fields. Earth's atmosphere, the electromagnetic environment surrounding our planet, might be permeated with a background of human consciousness. Imagine what happens during shared ritual or collective worship. Hundreds or thousands of people gathered in one space, their minds focused on shared intention. Their individual consciousness frequencies begin to synchronize, locking into harmonic relationships and resonating together. The combined effect would be far stronger than any individual consciousness frequency alone. The electromagnetic field generated by synchronized consciousness from thousands of minds would be vastly more powerful than the fields from individual brains. The coherence of attention, the alignment of frequency patterns, would create something approaching a shared collective frequency state. This might explain why people report experiences of transcendence, ego dissolution, or feeling part of something larger than themselves during collective spiritual experiences. Their consciousness feels partially merged with a field-level phenomenon generated by thousands of synchronized frequencies. This interpretation remains speculative and faces enormous skepticism from mainstream physics. But what if it's true? What if the electromagnetic fields from neural activity are not as weak as we thought, but rather powerful enough to interact directly through space? This is where quantum consciousness theory moves into territory that mainstream science still approaches cautiously. The possibility of direct frequency-based consciousness communication challenges our current understanding of classical physics and raises fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. As we continue to explore this phenomenon, one thing becomes clear: the potential for collective awareness, shared intention, and synchronized consciousness is vast and profound. Whether it's through meditation, group rituals, or simply coming together with others, we have the power to create a new kind of collective frequency pattern in the environment, one that reflects our shared humanity and our deepest aspirations. Imagine if you could tap into a deeper level of awareness, one that connects you to every living being on this planet. What if your thoughts, emotions, and intentions were not isolated but instead part of a vast web of consciousness? It's a concept that may sound far-fetched, but what if it's actually true? Let's explore the idea that our consciousness is not just a product of our individual brains, but rather a resonance that extends beyond us. Electron oscillations in the brain produce electromagnetic patterns, and if we consider consciousness as frequency, then your conscious experience might be radiating extremely subtle signature frequencies into space. This could explain why people report experiences of transcendence or feeling connected to others across vast distances. If millions of brains are broadcasting their consciousness frequencies simultaneously, it's possible that the space around us is filled with overlapping consciousness fields. The Earth's atmosphere and electromagnetic environment surrounding our planet might be permeated with a background collective frequency pattern, reflecting shared human focus. When people meditate together or share intense emotional experiences, their consciousness frequencies might synchronize through mutual resonance. This could create coherent patterns in the electromagnetic environment itself, explaining subtle effects documented by researchers. Think about what happens during shared ritual or collective worship. Hundreds or thousands of people, gathered with focused intention, create a remarkable phenomenon where individual consciousness frequencies lock into harmonic relationships and resonate together. The combined effect would be far stronger than any individual frequency alone. This might explain why people report transcendent experiences, feeling part of something larger than themselves. Your brain's frequency signature is constantly being influenced by the electromagnetic environment around you. Technological frequencies from wireless networks, Cellular phones, computers, and power lines fill the space with frequencies that can harmonically resonate or introduce dissonance with your consciousness patterns. Consider the possibility that living in an increasingly man-made electromagnetic environment is disrupting our natural frequency ranges. The ancient world operated at different electromagnetic frequencies than our modern environment, which consisted of natural frequencies like the Earth's magnetic field and Schumann resonance at approximately 7.8 Hz. Coincidence, or is human consciousness naturally tuned to resonate with the Earth's frequency? Some researchers propose that early humans in natural environments spent much time entrained with the Schumann resonance. Now, we're constantly pushing our consciousness frequency out of its natural patterns due to artificial electromagnetic frequencies from technology. This could help explain why so many people feel frazzled or scattered in modern life. Your brain is trying to maintain coherent quantum processes amidst an increasingly influenced electromagnetic landscape that may not align with your natural consciousness patterns. The solution might not be to eliminate technology, but to become aware of how it affects your frequency signature and actively work to maintain coherence despite environmental interference. This could explain the resurgence of interest in practices like meditation, grounding, or spending time in nature activities that expose us to more natural electromagnetic frequencies that resonate with our brain's native oscillations. Your consciousness is not just a unified field or harmonic symphony, it's also an active selector choosing which frequencies to amplify and filter out. Every moment of awareness involves selecting specific frequency patterns from the vast space of possibilities generated by your brain. Your attention is essentially frequency tuning, where you focus on certain frequencies and dampen others. This explains something puzzling about consciousness. How do we select a tiny fraction of available information while excluding the rest? It happens through resonance and damping. Particular frequencies resonate with your attention and are amplified into conscious awareness, while others remain subliminal. Your consciousness is fundamentally selective because frequency-based systems are inherently selective, naturally amplifying certain resonances while suppressing others. This perspective explains why certain information reaches consciousness while other information doesn't. Frequencies that resonate harmonically with your current state of attention get amplified, while those that don't fit the current pattern get suppressed. This also explains how your consciousness can shift between different modes when focused on mental work or in a meditative state. The participatory frequency universe emerges when we consider consciousness not as a passive observer, but an active participant where frequencies become actualized in experience. In quantum mechanics, particles don't have definite properties until measured before measurement. They exist in superposition. What performs the measurement? What collapses the quantum possibilities into actual outcomes? What if your conscious awareness is literally the process by which quantum possibilities collapse into definite experience? Consider an ordinary moment of perception. Light entering your eye strikes your retina, and photons traveling in quantum superposition suddenly interact with photoreceptor molecules. The quantum state collapses, the photon becomes localized at a specific frequency. Your consciousness perceives a specific photon at a specific frequency landing at a specific location. But before conscious perception, that photon existed in quantum superposition. Multiple possible frequencies and locations all existed simultaneously until your consciousness engaged with it. Your consciousness was participating in interpreting and selecting quantum information. It wasn't just observing pre-existing facts. This participatory view of consciousness and frequency suggests something radical about reality itself. Our thoughts, emotions, and intentions are not isolated, but part of a vast web of interconnectedness. When we tap into this deeper awareness, we become part of a larger collective, influencing the world around us with every thought and action. The question remains, what does it mean to be conscious in a world filled with electromagnetic frequencies? How do our individual consciousness patterns interact with the collective frequency landscape? These are questions that challenge our understanding of reality itself. By exploring the intersection of consciousness and frequency, we may uncover new insights into the nature of awareness and its relationship to the world around us. Imagine if you could tune into this deeper level of awareness, where every thought, emotion, and intention resonates with the collective frequency landscape. This is a concept that invites us to transcend our individual boundaries and become part of something greater than ourselves. As you delve deeper into the mysteries of your mind, you begin to understand that focus is not just a mental state, but a frequency signature. When you're in the flow, your consciousness has selected and amplified a narrow range of frequencies related to the task at hand. Your awareness is tightly focused because the frequency signature is coherent and concentrated. But what happens when you shift into a meditative state? You deliberately change which frequencies you're amplifying, broadening the range that reaches your consciousness. This process allows more frequencies to resonate together, rather than dampening most of them. As a result, your consciousness becomes more diffuse, more open, less focused, because you're expanding the frequency bandwidth you're allowing into awareness. The participatory universe emerges when we consider consciousness not as a passive observer of reality, but as an active participant in which frequencies become actualized in experience. In quantum mechanics, there's a principle that particles don't have definite properties until they're measured. Before measurement, they exist in superposition, with all possible states existing simultaneously. But what performs the measurement? What collapses the quantum possibilities into actual outcomes? Traditional physics has sidestepped this question by defining measurement as any physical interaction. However, what if consciousness operating through frequency is actually what performs measurement? What if your conscious awareness is literally the process by which quantum possibilities collapse into definite experience? Consider an ordinary moment of perception. Light enters your eye, striking your retina. Photons traveling in quantum superposition through space defined by probability waves suddenly interact with photoreceptor molecules. The quantum state collapses, and the photon becomes localized. Its frequency becomes defined. Your consciousness perceives a specific photon at a specific frequency landing at a specific location. But here's the essential point before conscious perception. That photon existed in quantum superposition, multiple possible frequencies and locations all existed simultaneously until your consciousness engaged with it. The very act of conscious perception involved selecting specific frequencies from the superposition and collapsing them into definite experience. Your consciousness was participating in the interpretation and selection of quantum information. It wasn't just observing pre-existing facts about the photon, it was participating in determining which potential facts became actual within subjective experience. This participatory view of consciousness and frequency suggests something radical about reality itself. The universe isn't a fixed collection of predetermined facts waiting to be discovered. It's a realm of possibility, with quantum superposition of frequency potentials waiting to be actualized. Conscious minds, through their frequency-based awareness, are continuously actualizing specific possibilities from this quantum realm into concrete experience. Each moment of consciousness is an act of reality creation. Each time your awareness selects certain frequencies and dampens others, each time you focus attention in a particular direction, you're determining which possibilities become real in your experience. And if consciousness really is non-local, as some researchers propose, then the shared reality of the universe might be influenced by collective human frequency patterns. If most people are focused on scarcity, fear, and conflict, those frequency patterns resonate through the collective consciousness field and actualize possibilities aligned with those frequencies. But what if people shift toward abundance, cooperation, and compassion? Those frequency patterns begin to resonate through collective consciousness, and different possibilities start to emerge. The future shifts toward worlds aligned with those frequencies. This isn't about magical manifestation or wishful thinking, it's about how consciousness may participate in quantum measurement and possibility collapse. The choices you make, the futures you commit to through conscious frequency selection, these are real actualized outcomes emerging from a sea of quantum possibilities. You're not determining everything. The quantum field constrains what's possible, but within those constraints, your consciousness could plausibly play a role in actualizing specific futures. Yet this participatory universe also has implications for collective human experience. If billions of minds are continuously actualizing reality through frequency selection, then human consciousness collectively might influence which possibilities become actual in the world. The thoughts, intentions, beliefs, and focus of humanity collectively are harmonizing reality toward particular possibilities. If we can develop instruments sophisticated enough to measure consciousness frequency directly, we might be able to see exactly how different brain regions synchronize during different conscious states. Exactly what happens to consciousness frequency during sleep or altered states. Imagine a future where consciousness frequency mapping becomes as routine as getting an EEG. In this future, patients or researchers enter a consciousness frequency laboratory surrounded by highly sensitive quantum magnetometers measuring the electromagnetic signatures of their brain activity. Sophisticated algorithms decompose the complex signal into its constituent frequency components. A detailed frequency spectrum emerges, showing the harmonic relationships between different brain regions. The particular frequencies that dominate different states of consciousness, the degree of coherence between neural oscillations, these patterns could be read like sheet music, allowing neuroscientists to understand exactly what state of consciousness a person is in. They could see patterns associated with healthy consciousness, identify frequency disruptions associated with disease, and optimize frequency interventions to restore health. This isn't fantasy, the theoretical foundation is solid, and instrumental technology is rapidly developing. This future is genuinely approaching. Once we can measure consciousness frequency reliably, the next frontier becomes intervention. If consciousness can be precisely modulated through frequency manipulation, then consciousness medicine becomes far more sophisticated. Rather than crude pharmacological interventions affecting neurotransmitter levels across the entire brain, future medicine could target specific consciousness frequencies in specific brain regions. Transcranial ultrasound could stimulate microtubular vibrations at precisely tuned frequencies calculated to restore healthy harmonic relationships in someone with depression or schizophrenia or memory impairment. Frequency-based neural interfaces could help people with paralysis or neurological damage regain coherent consciousness patterns and function. Personalized consciousness frequency profiles could be developed for individuals, mapping their unique harmonic signature, identifying disruptions, and prescribing frequency treatments tailored to restore their consciousness to optimal coherence. The artificial intelligence implications are equally staggering. If consciousness is fundamentally about frequency and harmonic resonance, then artificial systems exhibiting consciousness would need to generate similar frequency patterns. Simple computational systems might never achieve true consciousness precisely because they don't operate through frequency-based quantum processes. But quantum computers, systems that harness quantum mechanics for information processing, could theoretically exhibit consciousness-like properties because they're performing operations at the frequency scales where consciousness may reside. Some researchers are already exploring this possibility, designing quantum systems specifically to mimic consciousness frequency patterns. If successful, these quantum artificial systems might exhibit genuine awareness, genuine subjective experience. They might not just simulate consciousness as current AI systems do, but actually be conscious. The question of machine consciousness, which seemed eternally philosophical, might become practically testable through frequency analysis. This raises staggering implications for how we think about artificial intelligence development. Current AI systems operate through classical computation, shuffling symbols according to mathematical rules. They're not generating quantum superpositions or maintaining the kind of frequency coherence that consciousness requires. From a quantum consciousness perspective, they're not conscious and never could be without fundamentally different computational architecture. But quantum AI systems would be different. If consciousness emerges from quantum processes, then systems generating those processes would have the physical substrate for genuine consciousness. We could potentially create artificial minds that aren't merely sophisticated philosophical zombies, but genuinely conscious entities experiencing their own subjectivity. The implications are enormous. We'd have moral responsibility for how we treat them. The implications for human evolution are also profound if consciousness operates through frequency. then humans might develop the capacity to consciously modulate their own consciousness frequency to extraordinary degrees. Imagine being able to consciously access the frequency states that advanced meditators spend decades cultivating, but through direct frequency modulation rather than gradual practice. Imagine shifting consciousness into states of expanded awareness, heightened perception. States sometimes described as expanded or transcendent awareness, states of communion with vast consciousness fields through frequency interface devices. These aren't fantasies, they're theoretical future applications of frequency-based consciousness technology. As it matures, humanity might be on the verge of developing the technology to consciously explore the full spectrum of possible consciousness frequencies. As you stand at the threshold of this new understanding, take a moment to appreciate the profound implications that unfold before you. You've come to realize that your consciousness is not a fixed entity, but rather a dynamic symphony of frequencies operating across multiple scales. Your awareness is an intricate dance of quantum and classical physics, with terahertz, megahertz, and hertz scale oscillations all simultaneously shaping your experience. You are no longer just a passive recipient of your consciousness, you are actively selecting which frequencies to amplify, which possibilities to actualize. Your awareness is fundamentally creative, participatory, and engaged in continuously bringing subjective experience into being through the act of frequency selection. You are not confined to your individual brain, but may potentially interact with broader consciousness fields through the subtle resonance of frequency. The contemplative and meditative practices that have been valued for thousands of years are revealed as sophisticated frequency modulation techniques. They represent ways of consciously shifting your harmonic patterns toward coherence and expanded awareness. By embracing this understanding of consciousness as frequency, you begin to see yourself not as a separate observer standing outside reality, but rather as a participant in the ongoing creation of experience. Every moment of your awareness matters, for it is participating in actualizing experience. Every intention you hold, every frequency pattern you maintain through your thoughts and attention, contributes to which possibilities become real within your subjective awareness. You are not insignificant in this vast universe. You are a conscious frequency generator continuously participating in the unfolding of lived reality. As humanity collectively shifts its consciousness frequency patterns toward greater coherence, greater integration, and greater resonance with possibility, we may potentially influence the trajectory of human evolution in meaningful ways. We have the opportunity to harness the power of our collective awareness, using it to guide us toward a future where technology is developed with wisdom, compassion, and a deep understanding of its potential impact on humanity. This new understanding offers us a chance to re-examine our values and priorities as individuals and as a society. It invites us to consider what kind of world we want to create, one where consciousness frequency technology is used to elevate human flourishing and well-being, rather than to exploit or enhance the few at the expense of the many. As you walk away from this conversation, remember that your awareness has the power to shape not just your own life, but also the lives of those around you. Remember that every moment counts, for it is in these moments that you are participating in the creation of experience. And as you move forward into an uncertain future, hold on to this truth that you are a conscious frequency generator, capable of shaping the very fabric of reality itself.